Thank you all for being with us today. Jay Ziabart, nutritionist and health educator, and I'm Megan Mesher-Cox. We host this disease prevention and reversal summit and hope to be able to provide more information out there. So good information that's really evidence-based healthcare information and truly lifestyle medicine. So Dr. Sara Whatley, I met her when we worked at Dignity Health together. But she is on her own now, and she's doing a type of practice called direct primary care. Direct primary care is really focused on the patient and making sure that the physician and the patient have as much time together as possible, and the physician is really able to take care of the patient's needs. It cuts out that middleman, which is the insurance company. So without further ado, I'll send it over to Dr. Whatley.
Okay, so good morning. Thank you everyone for tuning in today and taking some interest in this. It's awesome. I am excited to talk to you all about plant-based eating for kids. And as you heard, I'm a family medicine physician. And so talking to families is a big part of what I do every day. And I love taking all of those opportunities to talk to families about healthy choices. We all have kids in our lives in one form or the other, whether, you're a parent or grandparent or aunt or uncle or a friend or a teacher. So we have children in our lives. And so the other thing is we all have a lot of inputs in our lives as well, constantly, thousands a day of marketing or billboards or social media and print ads and other people. And so there can be some confusing messages out there, even if it's subconscious. So I like to take the opportunity to put all those positive inputs out there, especially for children who are just sponges and they're absorbing everything that's going on in their environment. So we can jump right in here and talk about just a quick overview of whole food plant-based diet. I know Dr. Megan already touched on that, but just a little refresher. So whole food plant-based diet is made up of lots of plants, lots of variety and beautiful colors and flavors and fiber and antioxidants. And we get these through vegetables and fruits, grains, beans, seeds, nuts, lentils. And then a plant-based diet really is avoiding processed food as well. So it's not just incorporating the plants, but also trying to have less of the processed, especially sugar. And then I encourage my patients to avoid processed flour as well. And then a plant-based diet also avoids animal products, so meat, dairy, and eggs. And as you heard in the information before, there's benefit to plants for every type of person. So wherever you are on your journey, adding more plants is going to be beneficial for your health. And so the studies show whether you're vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, or a pescatarian, adding more plants is better. So this is an overall, and these foods are good for all humans, adults and children. There are some things for children, though, that are important to know. So what is different for kids? Well, they are rapidly growing. For example, in the first year of life, children will triple their weight. That's the expectation in the first 12 months of life. And so that's pretty significant. So they need lots and lots of nutrients, lots of calories, because it takes a lot of energy to grow. And this growth continues all the way through puberty. So carbohydrates are the preferred energy source for our body. And when I'm referring to carbohydrates, I'm talking about healthy plant carbohydrates, meaning like beans and sweet potatoes and grains, not processed carbohydrates. And I say that specifically because we are talking about children versus adults. And sometimes we have some thoughts about carbs being bad or, trying to avoid them. And so I don't want to send a confusing message. If I'm ever referring to carbohydrates or fats, then it's healthy plant foods. So we prefer carbohydrates, and then also children really need a lot more fat in their diet than an adult. And this is because fat is used for so many different systems, organ systems, and all of that. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And then, children do have this increased calorie requirement, but that doesn't mean that they need junk calories just so we feel better that they're eating. It's conditioning that causes us to overeat, and children are not born with that conditioning. So they will eat when they're hungry, and they'll stop when they're full. And so sometimes when we're adding things to our habits, like, oh, we need to finish our plate, or forcing food or power struggles that we might introduce at the table, really kind of just letting kids eat when they're hungry and then stop when they're not is the healthiest approach to that, especially in those first 3 years of life. And then once we introduce processed foods, the delicious high concentration of sugar and processed fat, that's when we start getting some overeating habits, because those foods do not send the same signals to the brain that you're full. So that's why we can sit down and eat an entire bag of potato chips, but it's very rare we could sit down and eat an entire bag of broccoli. So just knowing that about children, that they do regulate themselves. With that said, we also want to be aware that fruits and vegetables have less calories. And so when we're feeding children, we want to really focus on calorie dense foods. Fruits and vegetables are still going to be a part of the plate, and they're still going to be offered. But we don't want to only offer that, or really trying to cut out other foods, again, because we're thinking as an adult and not as a child. So it's okay to give them that big, colorful variety of foods, and not sticking with what we call a raw or macrobiotic diet. That is not healthy for children. They're not able to get all the nutrients that they need. So that's the story on carbohydrates. Now, protein, which is probably one of the hottest topics when we're talking about nutrition and changing to a plant-based diet, because of, again, just conditioning, and it's ingrained in us that protein comes from animal products. But plants have plenty of protein. Plenty of protein, especially if you're eating a variety of foods. And the other part of that is that there's certain amino acids that we get from protein that we use as building blocks for growth. And the plant protein is not incomplete. We used to think you had to eat certain foods together in order to have that complete protein if you weren't eating animal products. But it's really, it's an all sums game. It's not one meal at a time. Our body takes what it needs each time that we eat, and it can take those building blocks and make what it needs. So variety is key. And there's tons of studies that have been done that show that whether children are plant-based or not, they're getting plenty of protein, more protein than we really need. And to put it into context, there's different equations that we'll use to specifically determine the grams per day that are needed for children, and that depends on their age and their weight. But by and far, generally speaking, those first few years of life, we're talking somewhere around 17 grams of protein per day, which is really not that much. Like one slice of whole grain bread has 4 grams in it, which, is we're already a quarter of our protein for the day with one item. 2 cups of soy milk is over half of the daily need for protein. So it's a lot easier to get protein into the diet than we think. It's just the mindset and the way we look at our food. Okay, so back to fat. So fat is our friend when it comes to children. We may have heard things like DHA and EPA, and maybe even seen some supplements or different milks that are fortified with these things, but fat is good for kids. Talking about that energy need, when we take in foods and it's broken down, it gives us a certain amount of energy. So fat has 9 calories per gram, and then protein and carbs have 4. So fat has double the amount of energy for the body. And you need that when you're tripling in size in your first year. And so fat is used for a lot of things, organ growth, for heating. So you might notice like babies who, newborn babies, they wake a lot, they need to eat a lot and frequently because they just don't have enough fat reserve to get them through the night. Fat also helps with padding because children fall down a lot. If we fell as much as children, as adults, we would be in big trouble. Or you hear people say, oh, they're losing their baby fat. And that fat serves a really legitimate and important purpose. Fat also helps us to absorb certain vitamins, and it helps our immune system. And then another point as well, if we really want to look at, okay, what does a human baby need? Then we would look at breast milk because that's what we're using to help them to grow. And it's 44% fat. So we need a lot of fat in the beginning of life. About 30 to 40% of daily calorie needs need to come from fat for kids. So whole food, lots of variety, but calorie dense and fat is good for kids. Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about supplements. I don't want to get too into the weeds on this one, but I do want to touch on it because it's important, and start by saying that all diets are supplemented, whether you're a meat eater or a plant eater, it doesn't matter. We may not realize we're being supplemented. So dairy milk, for example, is fortified, as well as our table salt, infant cereals. So everyone's getting supplements in one form or another. I always am encouraging food first and getting all of our nutrients from that. But there are going to be times for many, many reasons, whether it's getting in enough food or the way that we're growing our food and all of those different reasons that we're not getting all the nutrients that we need. So for children, they need iron, vitamin D, iodine, choline, and omega-3s. And this can vary by age as well. So again, I don't want this to create like some overwhelm, like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a terrible job and I need to get all of these for my children right away. But I can provide a reference supplement that has all of that outlined if that's something that needs to be incorporated into your day-to-day. And then I want to also touch on calcium, because this is one of the more common things that are brought up in my practice when we talk about cutting dairy out of a child's diet. The parents are always worried about calcium. And so calcium is very important. We're building bones and nerves and muscles. But there's plenty of calcium in plants. So again, if we're getting that variety of fruits and vegetables and beans, then we're going to be getting plenty of calcium. And also noting that calcium is more what we call bioavailable in plant foods. And that means once you put something into your body, how is it broken down and how much of it is absorbed? That's the bioavailability. And then also additionally, a lot of different foods are fortified with calcium. Now, specifically, it's important to make sure you're communicating with your doctor about supplementing. We don't want to just start a supplement, especially something like iron. But for those who've been to the doctor with their children, you know that we are doing the little finger poke and checking their hemoglobin, which helps us understand their iron levels when they're little. So if you are predominantly plant-based as a parent and you are nursing, then around 6 months, so a little bit earlier than we normally would be a good time to start checking that in your child, because iron can't make it through the breast milk to the baby. If they are on formula, there is iron already in the formula, so that may be less of an issue. And then checking around 12 months when dairy is introduced, which is one of the number one risk factors for children to be anemic. Okay, so why is all of this important? This is all important because children, if we're not giving them a healthy diet that they're intended to have, then we're going to get adult diseases earlier, and that's exactly what we're seeing. We have an increase in type 2 diabetes in children by 30%. This used to be an adult disease that you would get when you're older, but now we're seeing it in children as young as 10 years old. 1 in 3 children are overweight, and these have long-term effects. And so this graph's a little bit small, but you can see that, if a child is overweight or obese, they can have sleep apnea, they can get fatty liver disease, they can get arthritis earlier, low back pain, not to mention the social aspects of being overweight. And so if some of these things are ringing a bell, like, hey, I'm dealing with some of that as a grown-up, we would not want to put that onto our children. So it's really important that we take it seriously now before it becomes a problem. When you're on a plant-based diet, this is going to help to regulate weight because you're getting a lot more fiber and antioxidants into the body. You're not getting those processed foods, which again send that mixed message to the brain about being full. And a plant-based diet also decreases inflammation. It increases how your brain performs, your gut bacteria, which is so important for our immune system. So there's so many benefits. It's become such a problem with childhood obesity that we have a month for it now. So September is National Childhood Obesity Month. And if you think about what do we have other months for, we have cancer months, and we have heart disease awareness months. And so this is a big deal and something to take seriously, but something we can totally easily modify and have a lot of control over. So with that said, challenges and next steps. So challenges. I am also a mom, and so I have children. I live in real life, and sometimes they're not like, Mom, you've provided this beautiful plant-based diet for me. You're so great. I want to eat all the things, though I would love if that happened. So I want to touch on picky eaters. If you are plant-based when you're pregnant and nursing, your child's already going to have a wider palate. But if not, don't despair. It's never too late to make changes. But pickiness comes from a couple of different things. We want our children to eat. If they don't eat, we get worried. So then if we do find foods that they like, we start to just continually provide those foods to them, and that changes their palate, and then all they want are those foods. And so if it turns out that they really like chicken nuggets and pizza, then guess what? We're having chicken nuggets and pizza all the time. And it's not a shocker that when we introduce other foods that they're not going to like those. So what research has shown is that it takes 8 to 15 exposures of a certain food for a child to like that food. And so that's significant. So we don't just, put something green on their plate once or twice and they shy away from it and then we give up. We just want to keep offering it and keep offering it. And then also, as usually with younger children, food aversion is totally normal. When they try new foods and make faces, that's just them learning about the foods and, okay, this is different than what I'm used to. It's fine. It doesn't mean they hate it. It doesn't mean give up on that food. And then neophobia. So a fear of something new is totally normal, especially in younger children. And that's just, they're trying to learn about the world and they like consistency. And so if you put something new on their plate, they're like, what is this? What's going on? It's a normal reaction. And again, it's just about offering the foods and starting to create familiarity around those foods so that it feels safe to them to eat those foods. And then if you are trying to change your diet, a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that. And that's okay. As long as you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, then people can think and say, whatever they want. You don't need, the choice is yours and how you want to approach that, but we can't force other people to change. All we can do is be an example and offer healthy foods. And if people do ask questions, we can answer them. But there's going to be resistance and maybe some lack of understanding, even with your physicians, if they're not familiar with a plant-based diet. All of that is normal. So if someone does ask a question about your diet, it doesn't mean that your diet is wrong. Okay. And so if there's questions about that, if someone does bring something up, like, how do you know what your protein requirements are, how much iron you need? That's something you can definitely ask your doctor if they're familiar, or use a reputable reference. So then you feel comfortable with those answers as well. And then what can we do now? So if you're already plant-based and your kids just love eating all the things, then wonderful, we're already there. But if we're at different places in our journey, the most important thing is to just offer those foods, just offering colorful variety of different foods every day. And they can eat it or not eat it. But again, we're creating familiarity. If we're on the chicken nugget and mac and cheese diet, hey, it is what it is. There's no judgment or criticism. We just have to know where we are. And I always encourage my families to keep the plate the same, make it look the same for the kids, and then start adding the things you would like them to have. They'll become familiar, they'll become okay with it. A lot of times they'll be attracted to those healthier foods too, because they're bright colors and they look interesting. And then over time, you can start to decrease the quantity of those foods you prefer that they don't have, while their taste buds are changing. So that would be a really achievable way of approaching that. Forcing children to eat is not helpful. It creates a lot of resistance and actually maybe some disordered eating habits in the future, and most likely is not going to get to your goal. And again, this is an all sums game. So if one day you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I got the proper amount of protein and choline and iron, and what are we going to do? That's okay. The next day, you're just, again, offering more variety of foods, and the body's going to take what it needs and create those building blocks. There's also some great resources. There's a lot of information out there, so I don't want to create overwhelm for anyone, but it is important that you're getting a reputable, very well-studied resource to use for reference. And so I like Plant-Based Juniors, they're nutritionists. And then Wellness Pediatrician, her website has a lot of really great resources as well. Veggie Doctor Radio is a podcast if you like that, and that's just easier for you. So there's lots of reliable resources so you can get some more information as well and feel supported. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Whatley. That was awesome. We do have a few questions here, please. So the first question, I've even experienced for myself taking my kids to the pediatrician, asking if our children drink milk, and if our children say no, and then the doctor recommends that they eat cheese. So what would you say to people that have had the experience where their own pediatrician has recommended that their kids eat cheese, or other recommendations that are really, more dated and not recommended anymore?
Mm-hmm. Well, you can take a couple of different approaches. One would be to just nod and smile and then move on because you know better. And as a physician, obviously, I know what is taught in medical school, and it takes incredible desire and intention to learn about nutrition because it's not something that's taught. The pendulum is swinging a little bit now with medical school curriculum, but they really don't know any better. And I know that because I didn't even know any better like a few years ago. And so they're not trying to harm you or your child. They're just misinformed and didn't have any real reason to learn the new research. And so another option would be to just share like, oh, okay, I hear you, and I understand. I'm going more plant-based for some other reasons, and I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'm going to keep an eye on the calcium and the protein, something like that. So just, no need for resistance, just a place of curiosity.
Perfect. Okay. Next question. My kids give my 18-month-old grandson very little dairy milk. He is not on a plant-based diet. How much milk should he have every day?
If you're asking how much dairy milk he should have every day, the answer is none. Dairy milk is not recommended for children. Even the Academy of Pediatrics is now in support of a plant-based diet. It's just conditioning. Milk does a body good, resonates with so many people, so it's marketing. So dairy milk is not necessary. If we're talking about vitamin D, calcium, or protein calories, then that can come from other types of milk, non-dairy milks. For example, soy milk or pea protein milk, or foods.
Great. And what milks do you recommend if a family wants to give their children milk, but of course not dairy milk? What milks would you recommend? What should they look for when they're purchasing milk?
So part of it depends a little bit on age, because if they're toddlers, like if we're talking 1 to 3 years old, remember we need more calories and all of that. So we might be leaning more toward a pea protein milk that has DHA added, or a soy milk has some good protein, a little bit sweeter also, so kids like that. But always getting the milks that do not have added sugar, because they just sneak that in there everywhere. So those would be the ones I would lean on when they're a little bit younger. And then once they're older and eating more quantity of the table foods, then any variety sometimes would just depend on availability and preference, because there's hemp milk, cashew milk, almond milk, rice milk, the pea protein milk, soy. So really there's so many possibilities. There's really no wrong answer.
Okay, great. And a follow-up question to that, please. What would you say to families that have concerns about soy? You probably hear that a lot in your practice, I would imagine.
Sure. So so if you know that your child has a reaction to soy, then you can avoid soy. But most commonly this happens early on, like when you're maybe introducing a formula that's soy-based. And so maybe they'll have a reaction to that. It doesn't mean that you have to avoid soy forever. So if you have it out of their diet, then you can introduce in different ways where you don't have to do soy milk, but you can have other soy based foods like edamame or tofu. So those are some other ways of incorporating it in a different way, so that those enzymes aren't already broken down, such as in soy milk, and see if they still have a reaction. If the other concern is related to like the estrogens and soy being bad, soy, if you're consuming it in its whole form again and not processed, it's a phytoestrogen, so it's not cancer promoting. It's very, very safe. So I don't know if that's what the question was, but you can also avoid soy, but there's a lot of soy foods that are still healthy.
Perfect. I know I see in my practice a lot people that are still concerned about soy from back when, before we knew what soy did. And now, of course, we understand that soy actually it reduces our risk for cancers, including breast cancer, just like you said, right, in whole form. So the soy isolates or processed foods with soy in there, of course, to avoid, right, for children and adults alike.
Right.
How long does it take for taste buds to change?
That is a very good question. So it actually takes about 3 weeks for the taste buds to change due to cell turnover and all of that. So if we really want our taste buds to change, whether for ourselves or for children, it's important to cut down as much as possible on those processed foods with those dense calories and sweetness, like with sugar and processed fats. And then again, regularly offering 8 to 15 times that broccoli or whatever it is that you want your children to start wanting to eat.
That's awesome. Thanks. I've heard it so many times, likened to brushing your teeth, right? If they don't like it, they don't know how to do it. You keep doing it. You keep doing it. You keep doing it, right?
Right, exactly.
And then lastly, please, can you tell us about your practice?
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you. So I worked in the traditional medical setting for the last 10 years, and I love what I do as a doctor. There were some struggles with our healthcare system. Maybe some people have experienced that with not being able to get into your doctor and long wait times and rushed visits. And I really felt like I could just serve my patients in a better way. I wanted to spend more time with them. I don't want to write more prescriptions for more pills and procedures. I want to help my patients to achieve that better health. And in the current system, it just wasn't going to happen. I can't spend a half an hour talking about nutrition with a patient and meet my goals. And so I decided to break away from that structure. And I opened up my own practice. It's called a direct primary care model. And so this is where I work directly with patients through a membership model. And that way I can spend more time with them, and patients are able to get in quickly for an appointment, or they have access to me through phone calls or text messages, emails, anytime. And just that availability, a lot of peace of mind for people, especially with current times, and then also allowing us to explore those higher levels of health.
That's awesome. Well, I've heard your practice is very successful. Even it's been how many months now?
Well, we officially had the grand opening in November. So, and I have over 100 memberships already, which is like amazing. So I know people want this type of platform to really work collaboratively with their physicians. So it's exciting.
That's wonderful. And we'll share Dr. Whatley's information at the end too. She's located on Ventura Boulevard in Camarillo. So again, we'll share it at the end. So thank you so very much for being with us and sharing all the great information.
Yes, thank you for having me.